Welcome to Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, where we talk about gospel insights through great stories and help you find entertainment that is both true and beautiful. Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree is part of the Public Square Media network of podcasts that seek to bring an LDS perspective into the public square. I'm Carl Cranny, here with my co-host, Liz Busby, who we can now call Master Liz Busby because she just graduated with her master's degree from BYU. So congratulations, Liz.
Oh, thanks. That's so nice. I am glad to be done and hoping that being done with my thesis means we can get back to recording regular episodes of the podcast.
Yes. We don't begrudge you all the time you've spent on your academic pursuits, and are glad that you've successfully completed and defended on all those wonderful things. I do wish that calling people master was something that was part of our cultural lexicon. I keep calling people like you that, but it never catches on. In this episode of Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, we're going to cover two movies: Conclave, a 2024 political thriller film about electing a new pope. It's available on Amazon Prime. And The Two Popes, which is a 2019 biographical drama film about the transition from Pope Benedict to Pope Francis that is available on Netflix. We thought this timely given the fact that we have a new pope, and also because these are really interesting movies to sort of compare and contrast. And so I kind of want to start us off with that. What were your broad thoughts about these two movies? And I'm going to ask the question by saying, which one did you like more and why? And that's not necessarily an insult to the other one.
Yeah, I think they do have very different approaches to this transition in leadership. Conclave definitely feels more political. It's all about the process and the wheeling and dealing of the conclave and, plans within plans. It feels very political and makes the process of choosing a new pope feel like an election. Whereas The Two Popes, even though it starts and ends with a conclave, two different conclaves, it doesn't feel as political. It captures a lot more of the spiritual aspect of becoming a church leader and how that might be influenced by the Holy Spirit, by God. And so in that way, I really liked The Two Popes a bit more. It felt more authentic to me as a religious person. What do you think, Carl?
I'd have to agree, except that I didn't like The Two Popes a bit more. I liked it a lot more. I thought I would enjoy Conclave, but I'll just say this. Now that summer vacation is here, I don't have as much time to watch TV as I'd like to, which is probably better for my, mental health and everything. But so I have to watch things in bits and pieces. But if I watch something really good, it'll suck me in and I'll stay up really late one night watching a particular show. Even though I'd seen The Two Popes before, I burned through it pretty quickly. I think it took me 3 weeks to get through Conclave. It just didn't capture my attention. I found it very uninteresting in a lot of ways, precisely because there was no hint in Conclave that any of these people believe in God or feel that the Holy Spirit is moving upon them, or that the church is being led slowly according to God's will, that they're trying to discern what would God have us do in this moment. There was absolutely none of that. Zero, zip, nada, nothing. I'm sure there are politics involved in a situation like that in the Roman Catholic Church, but politics tinged with devotion and the seeking of God's will and the Holy Spirit, to what extent, I don't know. The cardinals are very careful about not talking about what happens in their conclaves, and I appreciate that. It's kind of a black box, and I think it should rightly be so. They've chosen that, and there it is. But there has to be more seeking of the Spirit than Conclave gave us. And I found The Two Popes just delightful. I know it's not historically accurate. They were not buddies. I don't think they watched the World Cup together, like at the end, like it insinuated. But it took these two people and gave them caricatures a little bit of their lives and used them to talk about different facets of what it would be like to lead a church and the burden that places on you, all of which I found was completely absent from Conclave.
I totally agree. It is interesting that the film that's basically two old guys talking to each other in various locations is more compulsively watchable than the political thriller, which has like that thriller pacing and like one reveal after another you would think is more compelling. But there's something really compelling about getting to know these two people very deeply. I did not know a ton about Francis's background. Like, I knew he was from South America, but that was about it. And like the background that they give him in this movie is really interesting and puts some context and spin on that. I kind of wish they had gone equally into Pope Benedict's background, but there's just little hints. It's not the same as Cardinal Bergoglio's background.
Right, it's true. But Benedict was actually a member of the Nazi youth because everybody had to be back then. But that felt like that was a missed opportunity to sort of talk about the things that Bergoglio did with their military junta, and it just never came up.
Yeah, that's such an interesting comparison because like Bergoglio's all about like, oh, this revolution happened in Argentina and what's he going to do and how's he going to comply with the government? And yeah, that would have been a perfect comparison. But I think it was supposed to be more about Francis. But I really did like that we got invested in the spiritual journey of these two men and how they feel about their faith, how they feel about their calling, how they feel about their service in the church and the direction of the church and the direction of the world. And just like, it's all about the character of these two people rather than like the machinations and the plots and the plans within plans.
Right. And this is no knock on any of the wonderful actors who were in Conclave, right? You know, Ray Fiennes, Stanley Tucci, John Lithgow, they all just knocked it out of the park. But I'm sorry, Sir Anthony Hopkins is better. I watch it with the subtitles, and they put his little ticks, his smacking of the lips was in the subtitles all the time. And I was like, yes, actually, those should be in the subtitles, because he's doing that very deliberately, trying to mimic Benedict's actual mannerisms, and having him and Jonathan Pryce together, because it was originally a two-person play, and they've spruced it up to be this movie. I really felt like I understood both of them. All the characters in Conclave felt like they were more one note, maybe with the exception of Cardinal Lawrence, the sort of the main character. None of them really seemed to have doubt or change or sort of go through a character arc of some kind, and that is to the movie's detriment, whereas I think The Two Popes has that in spades, and they kind of have their character arcs in juxtaposition to each other. That's what's so interesting. Like when Benedict is feeling really up on things, Bergoglio's like, no, but then as it unfolds and you realize that actually Benedict is not doing well, then Bergoglio feels a little more like to step in and help him, like, no, you have to stay the Pope. And it's just interesting to see sort of the two sine waves cancel each other out.
Yeah, indeed. I do have to say one thing about Conclave. Like, I thought all of the plotting was very clever, but the one thing that kind of drove me crazy, and I don't know a ton about the mechanics of a conclave other than, you know, watching YouTube videos during the 2 days of the conclave last month. So I don't know a ton, but it was like, oh, they're supposed to be sealed in this conclave. But Cardinal Lawrence is like all the freaking time getting information from outside. And I'm like, in what way is this sealed? Because it's like all the time we're like breaking the seal of the conclave. And I'm like, I'm not sure that, like, I don't really, but I feel like maybe this is crossing a boundary that he would not cross as a character. So that was very weird to me.
And there are even a couple of times where he says, no, don't tell me because I'm sealed off. And I'm like, you didn't say that 10 minutes ago when this other thing happened.
He's like, oh, we're sealed off, but now I'm going to go get this information. And no, we can't have it. Okay, I'm going to get it. It's like, all right, do we have standards or do we not?
What we do is we have dramatic standards. If it serves to move the plot forward, then he'll go get the information. And if it doesn't, and if the plot is better served by him not knowing, then, you know, I'm being a little mean to the scriptwriters of Conclave, but that is a point of inconsistency, I think, through their writing. So
I almost think it would have been a better movie if they had kept the conclave sequestered, because then you have your classical, you know, Agatha Christie style closed island where there's all the people and nothing from the outside is going to affect it. right? Instead of constantly, the characters aren't really making choices. What's happening is, oh, this person was already positioned there, and so that's going to knock this person out. And then there's a bombing, and so this person's out. And they're not really choosing so much as being chosen by the circumstances that have been set up, either by the previous pope or by the world itself. So it doesn't feel like the characters are choosing as much. And maybe that's why it feels like a weaker movie.
Yeah, I did like the moment towards the end when Cardinal Benitez stands up and basically chews them all out. Like that, I felt was like the one moment where like a true believer finally showed up in the movie, and he chews them all out, rightfully so, in some interesting ways. And then, of course, they elect him Pope after that. And that, to me, felt like something that, if you were to change the movie a little bit so there were a little more beliefs and things, then there totally would have been people saying, all these things happened so that we could have the Holy Spirit with us. When Cardinal Benitez had his little speech there and revealed to all of us that he is the man to lead the church into the next part of its history. I did really like that. And Carlos Diaz, again, everybody did a good job acting. To me, it just didn't feel like it quite lived up to the script writing and the acting of Jonathan Pryce and Sir Anthony Hopkins. But that's not necessarily, if you can't out Anthony Hopkins, that's not necessarily a knock against you. Like, that guy's just amazing. And he can, anything from, I can totally believe that this guy is Benedict the 16th, and I can believe that he is Hannibal Lecter, right? Like,
Oh,
he's great.
speaking of this, my husband came into the room while I was watching it, and he said, "Why is Hannibal Lecter the Pope? I don't understand." It's like, no, honey, this is my movie, not your movie.
Why is Hannibal Lecter the Pope?
Speaking of humorous moments, though, one thing I was not expecting in the two popes was the amount of humor that happens. And it's like old guy humor, right? It's like old people laughing at themselves and their old jokes. And they're not very well told jokes on purpose, right? Good acting, like we said. I think it's interesting how it's a more spiritual film, but it's also in some ways a more irreverent film. It's like, oh, let's show the Pope eating pizza. It's a little bit cutting that kind of tension of, oh, we're in the papal apartments, and it's so grand, and the robes and all these things, with like some reality that these are also people. And I really like that mix of humor and spirituality that it had.
Right. And it is something because, Benedict the 16th and Cardinal Bergoglio are very much an odd couple. And that dynamic really works to serve the ways that they interact with each other. Because when the Pope eats a pizza, it's at Bergoglio's suggestion, because they're there and they're kind of stuck in the sacristy of the Sistine Chapel. They're like, well, we can't really get out. We might as well have your bodyguard, go get pizza down the street and bring it to us. Having rewatched it now, I think my favorite moment in the entire movie, aside from when Benedict just offhandedly announces he's going to retire from the papacy, or,
It's such a good moment.
yeah, it's like, I'm going to renounce the papacy. But this bench is cold. He just walks off. I got to get my steps in.
It's such a good twist, though, because Bergoglio's come to announce that he wants to retire, and instead, like, it's flipped. Such a great twist. Anyway.
Yeah, my other favorite part is when Benedict says, well, it's a German joke. It doesn't have to be funny.
Yes. I did think that was actually really interesting, because we don't have this same experience of the transition from everyone speaking Latin to everyone speaking in the vernacular. And both movies kind of comment on that. Oh, when I have something bad to say, I say it in Latin so that nobody will understand. Only a third of the cardinals will get it because they're not up on their Latin. And then Conclave talks about how, because they're not all speaking in Latin, they tend to congregate into their language groups, right? Because that's who they're comfortable talking with. Even though all of these men can speak multiple languages, you just kind of gravitate towards that. And there is a sense of that loss of like this common language that they used to have, which was an interesting point.
Yeah, it is. And Francis kind of cracked down on the Tridentine Mass because it became a point of contention. That's above my pay grade, but it's interesting that there are people who feel so strongly that we need to use this dead language, and that B, it became a source of contention, so that C, the Pope can crack down on it. We'll see. There's sort of some rumblings from the various Catholic sites I visited that maybe they will draw back on the condemnation now that we have our new Pope. And I don't know. We'll see. It's just interesting. It's not something. The closest thing we have to that in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I think, is just the fact that we still do everything in English. There was that moment like 8-9 years ago or something where for a couple of conferences they had people delivering sermons in their native languages. And President Uchtdorf had a great little moment where he just slipped into German in the middle of announcing stuff, and everybody kind of giggled. But then they stopped. And now we're back to English again. And it's interesting that we're kind of doing it in reverse, where Catholics, everybody used to be Latin, and now they're all in the vernacular. And we, for a moment, went into the vernacular, but then withdrew back into English. I don't know if that's going to stick in our church, but I don't know why they stopped doing that either. So.
Oh, I can tell you why they stopped doing that. It's because...
The translations?
Yeah, it's the translation issue. So it's difficult to translate directly from Spanish to every other language. You usually have to go from Spanish to English, and then you have a bunch of people who can translate from English into all of the other languages. So this was a step that was slowing things down and making it really hard to do the simultaneous translation that they do, because they had to have someone translate it into English, and then all the other translators had to listen to them and then translate it again, and the logistics just weren't working, basically. And I wonder if that will change now that we have, heaven forbid we actually translate General Conference with AI, but it does really help with this kind of thing, right? Like, it makes it a lot faster. I still think we should have translators. We need people who have the spirit to translate things as opposed to just AI. But technology has come a long way since we tried that experiment, so I wouldn't be surprised if we try it again.
Well, I hope so, because if we keep speaking only English until the second coming, I feel like we would have lost something. But I don't know. That's all above my pay grade, both from the Roman Catholic side. Should we have the Tridentine Mass? I don't know, whatever. Versus should we have General Conference in multiple languages? I enjoyed watching it with the subtitles when they did that.
Okay, so I have a question, though. If you were going to make a movie similar to one of these movies, but about an event in LDS general authority leadership, what moment would you pick? What story would you tell? Because I was thinking about one for sure that I'm like, oh, it'd be so cool to do this one. Probably will never happen, but.
It's interesting because with the exception of the first prophet dying, Joseph Smith, they literally call it the succession crisis in LDS history lingo. There haven't really been any other moments worthy of drama. It feels to me maybe you would do something in Wilford Woodruff's day when the fundamentalists break off, or when they excommunicated those two apostles for not being behind the manifesto. I think it was the second manifesto. I might be getting my timeline wrong here. The second manifesto was when they were like, no, really, knock it off. And then two of the apostles were like, no, we don't want to. And so I don't think they kicked them out of the church, but they removed them from their position of the 12 apostles. And I found a book of their sermons in the library at the Washington, D.C. Stake Center. And I was like, why is there a book of the sermons of these two guys in my stake center? Okay, that's a little weird. We need to update the library in that stake center because there were some very old books in that collection. But other than that, I can't think of anything sufficiently dramatic. Maybe you could do the 1978 revelation and how President Kimball tried to get everybody on board.
That's the one I was going to pick, because there's definitely like some room for like conclave style political machinations that went on with some of the documents we know about now of like how this was arranged. So like possibly that you could do that. We can't really do a succession crisis movie, although maybe you could do a two popes type of movie, right? Like we already know who the next prophet is going to be. That's not a surprise, but you could have a conversation between two prophets talking about how this is going to go and like how you're feeling about how the church is and where your spirituality's at, all these different things. And that'd be kind
Yeah.
of cool. If it could be done well, it would be really interesting.
Who would you get to play Russell M. Nelson and Dallin H. Oakes?
Oh man, there's some fan casting we'll leave you to do on your own.
Right. I mean, now that I'm thinking about it, though, I do like the idea of doing the 1978 Revelation, because if you read President Kimball's biography, which I've read portions of, the relevant portions for this, and I'm talking about the one by his son, Ed Kimball, who also wrote a great article for BYU Studies that goes over a lot of the same sort of material. It really was, I don't want to say political.
Let's go with strategic instead of political.
Sure, but he wanted to set the stage, create the conditions that this revelation could be received. And we can certainly think of that as something that God would have inspired him to do to help bring everybody along. It reminds me a little bit of, I forget who the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice was with Brown v. Board of Education. And this is like a little known fact about Brown v. Board, was that it was picked up by the Supreme Court one year, but they didn't rule on it because the Chief Justice was like trying to get everybody on board. He thought, if we're going to overturn the separate but equal Fussy versus Ferguson, we have to do it 9-0. It can't be 7-2 or 8-1. And so they actually didn't rule on it in the first term. They had it on their docket. And it took him the second term to get everybody on board. So they overturned it, and Brown v. Board Education was a 9-0 decision. There's some strategery there as well, right? And President Kimball certainly, I think, helped set the stage to bring everybody into a position where they could have that marvelous experience that they all described as borderline Pentecostal if you read their various accounts.
Yeah. I just think it would be so fascinating. I mean, some people are very uncomfortable with the fact that there is strategy going on in that. But I think one of the advantages of this kind of movie is to show that, like, yes, there's politics and there's humanness going on in these things, but there's also spirituality. And I liked your reinterpretation of it, that Conclave could have leaned harder into this. All of these events happened so that we would recognize the next pope. And similarly, like, all of these human strivings happen so that God's will can be brought to pass in this official declaration too. I think a good piece of art could really help our culture deal with that. I think it would be great. But you'd have to get the right people to make it. So, and it's not me.
Yeah, I think that, again, is Conclave's failing, is that there was not enough of the spiritual, and only the human element was present, except for that one little moment, maybe. And then they didn't lean into it at all. And it was such a breath of fresh air when Cardinal Benitez stands up and condemns all of them. Because you have like the one guy who's sort of being
Might a bit racist.
yeah, a little bit racist, and maybe that's part of the problem. You can certainly see the human and the divine mixed together in the church. You're supposed to. We're all humans, but it is also guided by God. I think the Roman Catholics both believe that about themselves, and Latter-day Saints believe that about themselves. Actually, I think we Latter-day Saints can think that God is also leading and guiding the Catholics. These are sincere people. I believe he answers their prayers, and you know, these are all his children as well as 1.3 billion of them or whatever. He is concerned with who the next pope is and how the church is going to move forward. And these are considerations that the Lord has to deal with as well.
But you're right, the Conclave makes it clear what the correct answer is, according to the director. There's no chance that we get anything sympathetic about any of the conservative candidates because they are the wrong answer.
That's right. And the super conservative African pope is a hypocrite because in a moment of weakness and sin, he fathered a child with a nun, right? And then, of course, the reveal at the end, the guy who is chosen to be the new pope, who stood up really well and had his moment and got everybody to be like, oh, yeah, maybe we are acting like a bunch of spoiled children. He becomes the pope right as Cardinal Lawrence discovers that he is intersex. They just couldn't let it have its moment. There had to be some dig against conservatives, using that term very broadly, and the movie is worse off for that. There can be factions. There can be different people pulling in different directions. That's part of how the Roman Catholic Church operates. I'm sure that's part of how our church operates. But if you come down on these guys are obviously all hypocrites and liars, and the one person that sort of seems to rise above it all is actually on our side in some important ways.
It's kind of unfortunate, but it still was a really interesting look, and it's nice to see at least religions being used as material for a serious, interesting, dramatic film rather than, horror or just merely stereotypes. So that's nice.
That's fair. Yeah. I don't know how you would do this in the LDS tradition, but so I have a lot of favorite lines apparently from the two popes, but where Benedict says, how does the God correct one pope? Well, he sends another one. I'd like to see my correction. It's just a fascinating thing that I think we could take into our own lives, even as just, I'm an elders quorum instructor right now. Someday I won't be. I'd be curious to see my correction, right? What is it about the churn of the different people in the different callings that helps the kingdom move forward? I feel like something would be wrong if I were an elders quorum instructor for the rest of eternity, right? Like the rest of my days, if I only had this one calling, and I like teaching, I don't know. I'd like to see my correction. It's a good line.
Yeah, I think you can get that somewhat on a smaller scale. I don't know how you would do it on the general leadership scale, but definitely
Sure.
I have had this experience several times in my life. I've said this before on this. I've kind of have a self-righteous, judgy streak in me. And so I'll be like, oh, that person is just not doing their calling well. And I know the second that thought goes through my mind, I'm like, oh, crap. In 6 months, I'm going to have their calling. Like, I just know because God does this to me to humble me. And then I do it and, oh, this is a lot harder. And you learn a lot by being someone else's correction and like, oh, I could do it better than them. Or like, I hate the way sister so-and-so does this calling. I could do it better. No, actually you can't. And like, there are reasons why they were doing it the way they were doing it. And your way of doing it is just different, not necessarily better. So there is that interplay that we have at the ward level constantly where we are replacing each other in callings. Oh, one person does it this way, one person does it this way. And you can frame that negatively, right, as bishopric roulette or whatever. But it's also like, it's part of the plan that we all have to get along with each other and put up with each other. It's not a church run by perfection. It's a church run by humans. And that's good for us to learn how to get along and not turn it into politics and we win versus you win.
Well, and it's interesting because when somebody is called to a new calling, we all sustain them using a symbol that is a covenantal symbol in our church. You are not just voting to confirm this guy as the new whatever, or the sister as the new whatever. You are covenanting to support them in their calling. And that lays a different kind of burden on us. I think people misunderstand the voting to sustain sort of thing that we do in the church. I don't even think voting is the correct term. And when you treat it like it's a vote, I mean, if you know that the person is secretly, a drug dealer or something, fine. Yeah, you should say something. But if you don't, then sustain them and help them through their human frailty perform the calling, and the church will be better for it. Which is a really interesting moment that happens not on screen. It doesn't happen between, Benedict and Bergoglio, but it's in Bergoglio's flashbacks where he and one of the fathers perform mass together. One of the fathers he's betrayed and sold out. They were tortured for months, but they came together, and there's the moment in mass where you give the brotherly hug to everybody else. And they performed the mass together and gave the brotherly hug and forgave each other. In the temple, in the prayer circle, when it says, if you have unkind feelings, you're invited to withdraw. I've always thought that if you need to withdraw from the prayer circle, that's a you problem, not a them problem. And that is one of the hardest teachings of Christianity, of course, is to, and I hope nobody in the temple is your enemy, but like, love your enemies and certainly love those with whom you disagree with how they perform their calling. That is a much smaller ask than what the Lord actually requires of us in the Sermon on the Mount, to forgive and love and pray for our enemies, those who despitefully use us. which arguably Bergoglio did to these two fathers, one of whom he reconciled with and one of whom he did not. And the two popes doesn't seem to take a position on which of those two outcomes is the desirable one. And I think that is to its credit. It's messy and complicated. All right, so let's do some lightning round rating segments. Let's just start with the two popes and go through our sort of rubrics, and then we'll go through Conclave and go through them again. So content, clean versus objectionable material, using the Latter-day Saint afterlife, celestial, terrestrial, telestial, or outer darkness. What do you think for the two popes?
I mean, most of it is really celestial level. Some of the Bergoglio flashbacks are pretty intense in terms of the violence. My daughter walked in and got a little scared during those parts. So for sensitive viewers, I might put it terrestrial, but otherwise celestial pretty much.
I think that's fair. I think I would actually rate it exactly the same. Just be aware that about 3/4 of the way through the movie, there's a bunch of flashbacks to some pretty nasty stuff happening in the country, in Argentina, when Bergoglio was the head of the Jesuit order there. But the rest of it, I thought was pretty bland as far as objectionable material. Artistic merit, skillful, effective use of craft. We go 1 to 5 popcorn balls. I guess I'll go first on this one. I'm going to give it 5. I found it delightful. The acting was good. I don't think they could actually film in the Sistine Chapel, but it sure looked like they did. And when, that wonderful moment when he comes out, he's just decided to resign the papacy, but he comes out and gets to be the Pope for these people randomly in the Sistine Chapel who are doing the tour of it right then. And they take all the blurry selfies with him. It's just I found the whole movie delightful. So yeah, I'd give it 5 popcorn balls.
I can get on board with that. It does have some fun moments where the cinema moves beyond just your typical window pane storytelling, like the photos you were saying, and we cut to some news clips occasionally, so it shakes it up a little bit in a kind of a fun way. So it's got its own little artistic flair that I really enjoyed.
And gospel connections, morally edifying messages, 1 to 5 apricots.
I mean, I'd put this one at 5, honestly. I really enjoyed the frank discussion of the dark night of the soul. I can't hear heaven anymore. And what does that mean? And how do we continue on in spite of that? And how good people who believe the same thing can make different choices in the same political situation. The consequences, the fallout from that. It's just got really excellent examinations of how spirituality meets real life.
Yeah, I think I'd also give it a 5. I liked the personal touch of the two of them sort of discussing their particular personalities and backgrounds, and why Benedict is like, you're going to be a great pope. I hope it's you. And sort of his own doubts about himself, not just the dark night of the soul, but more I'm not really a manager. I'm sort of a thinker, a scholar.
Yeah, I'm not good with people.
I'm not good with people. And Benedict was not, but that doesn't mean he wasn't the Holy Father. And it's just so interesting to see a good conversation about our personalities and how they interact with the things that God has called us to. Sometimes in our weakness, sometimes to strengthen us, sometimes in our strengths. And there's a lot to sort of chew on there. All right, so moving quickly, again, I said lightning round. We're not doing lightning. It's fine. But as far as Conclave is concerned, content, clean versus objectionable material, celestial, terrestrial, telestial, outer darkness.
So we've got the bombing, but there's not a lot shown. We've got the scandal between the nun and the priest, but that's dealt with very circumspectly. I don't know. I could say you could go celestial on this one in terms of things that are objectionable, unless you're really objecting to the fact that church leadership is chosen by politics, which could be objectionable in a different way.
Sure. What was Conclave rated?
Oh, Google that.
It was PG. I think I would agree with you as well. Clean versus objectionable material. There's not really anything really objectionable here. If any of our listeners think the very presence of somebody who is intersex is objectionable, I strongly urge you not to. These are our brothers and sisters. as funny as it is to say brothers and sisters in a situation like this that are a part of the lived reality of people on this earth. And I actually believe the Catholic Church might handle a situation the way that they did. There are certainly some complicated issues around this issue, but it certainly should not be objectionable. So I wouldn't consider anything there. I think low-level celestial, maybe the first degree of the celestial kingdom, because it does deal with some weighty issues of the bombing and the frailty of humans and things like that. But it, despite it being mostly political and not religious, does deal with them in ways that are appropriate to the story and yet not salaciously so. All right, artistic merit, skillful, effective use of craft, 1 to 5 popcorn balls. I'd be curious to hear your take on this one.
I mean, the film choices are great. I love the way they use the mass of cardinals in like waves of color and do interesting designs and stuff with them as they're coming in. Super fun. And again, you get to film in the Sistine Chapel or some imitation of it, which is cool. Like everything is really neat and well done. I'm still baffled by this conclave that's supposed to be sequestered, but is apparently full of holes. So maybe I just don't love the plot, but as far as it goes, I'm going to give it 4 popcorn balls. There were a couple of moments where I was like, I don't know if I buy this, but overall, it's a really fun watch.
Yeah. I mean, they even talk a little bit at early on about how we're going to do something special to the windows so people can't use lasers to listen in on the conclave. And then Cardinal Lawrence is frequently talking with the guy who's out investigating these various things going on. So, yeah, because I think it wears its heart on its sleeve a little too much, thinking that all more of the conservative types are either hypocrites or misunderstood liberals or something like that. I'm going to give it 3. It would have been served better to showcase the variety without demonizing the one side of the spectrum. Even painting with a broad brush like you can, say, conservative and liberal. Although they use that term themselves in their description of the various, like, this guy's a moderate from Canada, this guy's a liberal from Britain. Anyway, so I'm going to give it 3 popcorn balls just because of the inconsistency of the script that dropped it down to 4 for you, and it would have been better served to showcase the variety of people acting in good faith. All right, Gospel Connections, our final scale, 1 to 5 apricots. I'll go first on this one. I think it depends on how you read sort of the ending of the movie. Are you going to think that Cardinal Benitez, am I being overly generous in his speech, giving up and sort of condemning all the other cardinals for their infighting and their politicking, and then he becomes the person that, clearly has risen to the moment in ways other people have not, and so he becomes the overwhelming favorite and is now elected the Holy Father himself? If you're going to go with that, I think I'd give it 4 apricots. If you think I'm overreading it and they didn't lean enough into God has chosen this person and we've all recognized this choice, then maybe I'd give it 3 apricots. Because, again, lots of humanity here, not so much the spiritual side of these things. I don't think people become Catholic cardinals to become quite as political as everybody in this movie was.
I can get on board with that. I think I would go with 3 apricots as well. I almost could justify it down to 2 apricots because we're not really talking about like morally edifying messages so much as an interesting dramatic plot, if that makes sense. Which is what makes it interesting to a general audience, but less interesting if you're looking for movies that have that spiritual relevance, if that makes sense. It's not like condemning the movie and saying it's a terrible movie. It's saying it's not that deep.
It's not that deep. That's fair. Maybe if they leaned more into that moment with Cardinal Benitez, I think I'm going to give it 3, but they didn't. So that's why it gets a 3. If they leaned into it, maybe I would have given it a 4. Well, thanks for joining us. This short turned into like 50 minutes. We'll see what it gets edited down to. But thanks for joining us here. We're going to get started again with more regular podcasts, maybe after summer, as we've family reunions and vacations and all things like that. But we're going to be getting back on the horse here a little bit more and hope you will come along with us the ride as we keep analyzing these movies and TV shows through the lens of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. So, this has been Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, encouraging you to seek after everything virtuous, lovely, of good report, and praiseworthy. See you next time.